The plasma storm had been raging for 3 days when Ethan Cole finally emerged from the ruins of Forward Operating Base Sigma-9. Purple lightning crackled across the alien sky, each bolt illuminating the devastation that had once been humanity's furthest outpost in the Drakthar conflict. The air tasted of copper and ozone, thick with the residue of weapons that shouldn't exist, and the death they had brought. Ethan moved through the wreckage with practiced silence, his nickname among the troops well-earned. The quietest soldier, they called him. Not because he was small or weak, but because words had become unnecessary to him after Thermopylae Station, after watching his wife and daughter burn in Drakthar plasma fire. Screaming had lost its appeal. Speaking had lost its purpose. Only the mission remained. His combat suit's sensors swept the debris field, searching for survivors he knew he wouldn't find. The Drakthar had been thorough, as they always were. Their assault ships had descended like carrion birds, unleashing bioweapons that turned the base's defenders into writhing masses of corrupted flesh before the plasma bombardment even began. Standard Drakthar tactics. Leave nothing alive. Leave nothing that could be called human. The irony wasn't lost on him that humanity's propaganda painted the Drakthar as vampires from ancient Earth mythology. Pale-skinned, elongated canines, superhuman strength, and an apparent taste for human blood when they took prisoners. But Ethan had fought them for 6 years now. He knew the truth was far worse than any fairy tale. Vampires in stories could be killed with stakes and sunlight. The Drakthar required considerably more firepower. A metallic groan echoed through the ruins. Ethan froze, his rifle snapping to his shoulder. The storm's electromagnetic interference made his motion tracker useless, but his instincts, honed by countless battles, screamed danger. He moved toward the sound, each step calculated to avoid the twisted metal and crystallized blood that littered the ground. The bunker's entrance had partially collapsed, its reinforced doors blown inward by the force of the Drakthar assault. Inside, emergency lighting flickered in death throes, casting dancing shadows that could hide anything or anyone. Ethan descended into the darkness, his suit's night vision painting the world in shades of green. The command center had taken a direct hit. Bodies lay scattered like broken dolls, their faces frozen in expressions of terror that death hadn't erased. He recognized Major Harrison's remains only by the rank insignia melted into what had been his chest. Another sound, softer this time, like breathing, but wrong somehow, too shallow, too desperate. He found her behind an overturned tactical display, and for a moment, his finger tensed on the trigger. Drakthar. Young. Maybe 8 or 9 years old by human standards, though their species aged differently. Her skin was the characteristic pale gray of her kind, marked with intricate scarring that looked ceremonial rather than combat-inflicted. Dark purple blood seeped from a wound in her side, where shrapnel had torn through her elaborate robes. She was dying. The smart thing, the soldier thing, would be to put a plasma round through her skull and move on. Standing orders were clear. No Drakthar prisoners. No exceptions. Admiral Reeves had made that abundantly clear after what happened at Kepler Station. The enemy had shown no mercy, and humanity would return the favor. But she was so small. Her eyes opened as he approached, revealing the distinctive crimson irises of her species. Instead of the hatred he expected, he saw only fear and pain. She tried to speak, but only managed a wet cough that brought up more of that purple blood. Ethan's hands moved before his mind could stop them, pulling the emergency medical kit from his belt. The biofoam wasn't designed for Drakthar physiology, but it might slow the bleeding. As he worked, he noticed the device attached to her neck, a collar of sorts that pulsed with sickly green light. He'd seen similar devices before, on human corpses. Bioweapon delivery systems, designed to kill slowly and painfully. Someone had used a human weapon on a Drakthar child. The realization hit him like a plasma bolt. This wasn't a soldier or a spy. This was a child caught in the crossfire, dying from weapons her own people hadn't created. The caller's serial number was partially visible. United Earth Coalition manufacture. Black Ops designation. The girl's breathing grew more labored. The biofoam had slowed the external bleeding, but internal damage was beyond field medicine. She needed a medical bay. And soon. The nearest human facility would shoot them both on sight. The nearest Drakthar outpost would do the same, assuming he was using her as bait. She whispered something in her language. Words he didn't understand but recognized as names. Calling for her mother, perhaps, or praying to whatever gods the Drakthar believed in. Her small hand clutched at his armored glove, and he was struck by how human the gesture was, how universal fear and pain could be. Ethan made his decision. The medical transport was still intact, hidden in the motor pool's underground bay. Its stealth systems could evade most sensors, and its automated pilot could handle the plasma storm. He carried the girl, her weight negligible in his powered armor, and secured her in the medical pod. The collar needed to be removed, but one wrong move could trigger its failsafe and kill her instantly. His fingers worked with the same precision that had earned him marksman certifications across 3 star systems. The collar's design was intricate, layers of biotechnology and conventional explosives intertwined. One mistake would turn the transport into vapor. The final connection separated with a soft click. The collar fell away, and the girl's breathing immediately improved. Color, what passed for it in her species, returned to her face. She opened her eyes again, focusing on him with an intensity that seemed impossible for someone so close to death. "Bloodkin," she said in heavily accented English, the words barely audible. Ethan knew enough about Drakthar culture to understand the significance. Bloodkin was their highest form of life debt, a bond that transcended species and allegiance. By saving her life, he had become something more than human to her, something more than enemy. The transport's engines hummed to life. Ethan plotted a course for the neutral zone, a stretch of space where neither side's military held sway. Smugglers, refugees, and the desperate called it home. He could find medical help there, maybe even someone who could take the girl somewhere safe. As the transport lifted off, the base's automated distress beacon finally activated. In 6 hours, a coalition rescue team would arrive to find only corpses and questions. By then, Ethan would be beyond their reach, branded a traitor for showing mercy to the enemy. The girl stirred in the medical pod, her vital signs stabilizing. She spoke again, a string of words in her own language that he didn't need to understand. The tone was clear: gratitude, relief, and something else. Something that reminded him painfully of his own daughter's voice when she'd wake from nightmares and call for him. Trust. The plasma storm raged outside the transport's shields, purple lightning illuminating their path through the debris field. Behind them, Base Sigma 9 burned. Another casualty in a war that had claimed too many. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the likelihood that neither of them would survive what came next. But for the first time in 3 years, since Thermopylae Station had taken everything from him, Ethan Cole felt something other than emptiness. It wasn't hope, exactly. Hope was too strong a word for such a fragile thing. But it was something. A crack in the armor he'd built around what remained of his heart. The transport's communication system crackled to life. Coalition frequencies, searching for survivors. He could answer, explain, try to make them understand. But he knew how that would end. A missile lock. A brief explosion. 2 more casualties in an endless war. He switched off the communicator. The girl mumbled something in her sleep, her hand reaching out instinctively. Without thinking, Ethan took it in his own, careful not to squeeze too hard. Her skin was cooler than a human's, but not unpleasantly so. Different, but not wrong. They flew on through the storm. Two unlikely companions bound by circumstance, and a child's ancient words. Bloodkin. In all his years of fighting, Ethan had never imagined he would become family to the enemy. But wars had a way of making strangers of friends, and friends of strangers. The neutral zone appeared on his scope, a collection of asteroids and derelict stations that both sides had written off as worthless, perfect for those who needed to disappear. He knew a doctor there, a woman who'd lost her license for asking too many questions about the war's casualties. She wouldn't care that her patient had purple blood and crimson eyes. As they approached the first checkpoint, automated but still dangerous, the girl woke fully. She looked at him with those alien eyes, and he saw intelligence there, understanding beyond her years. She knew what he'd risked, what he'd lost, what they both stood to lose if caught. "Name," she said in English, the word careful and deliberate. "Ethan," he replied, his voice rough from disuse. She nodded solemnly, as if filing this information away for safekeeping. Then, pointing to herself with a gesture that transcended species. Saris. It was such a simple exchange, but it changed everything. She was no longer just a Drakthar child, no longer just the enemy. She was Saris, and he was no longer just the quietest soldier. He was Ethan, blood kin to a girl whose people had taken everything from him. The checkpoint scanner swept over them, and for a heart-stopping moment, Ethan thought it would trigger an alarm. But the transport's falsified credentials held, and they passed through into the neutral zone's chaotic embrace. Dr. Lyra Miles operated from a converted mining station, its medical bay cobbled together from salvaged Coalition and Drakthar technology. She didn't ask questions when Ethan carried Saris inside, though her eyebrows rose at the sight of the Drakthar child. She simply went to work, her hands moving with the efficiency of someone who'd seen too much death to be surprised by life. While Lyra worked, Ethan stood guard, his rifle ready for the trouble he knew would come. The Coalition would brand him a traitor. The Drakthar would assume he'd kidnapped one of their young. Both sides would hunt them now, united in their desire to eliminate an anomaly in their perfect war. But watching Saris sleep peacefully in the medical bed, her breathing steady and strong, Ethan found he didn't care. For 3 years, he'd been a ghost, moving through battles without purpose beyond survival and revenge. Now, inexplicably, he had something else, a responsibility, a connection he hadn't sought but couldn't deny. Lyra emerged from the medical bay, wiping purple blood from her hands. "She'll live," she said simply. "Though I can't imagine what you plan to do with a Drakthar child in the middle of a war zone." Ethan didn't have an answer. He hadn't thought beyond saving her life, beyond that moment when she'd called him bloodkin and changed the trajectory of both their fates. "There's something else," Lyra continued, her expression troubled. "Her blood work shows traces of synthetic markers. Someone was experimenting on her. Those scars aren't ceremonial. They're surgical." The implications hit like a physical blow. The bioweapon collar hadn't been the first horror inflicted on Saris. Someone, human or Drakthar, had been using her as a test subject, a child, turned into a laboratory specimen in the name of victory. Ethan's grip tightened on his rifle. The war had taken his family, his purpose, his humanity. But looking at Saris, at what both sides had done to an innocent, he felt something new kindle in his chest. Not just protectiveness, but rage. Clean, purposeful rage at a war that devoured children as readily as soldiers. "How long until she can travel?" he asked. 2 days, minimum. Her physiology is remarkably resilient, but those experiments did damage I'm still cataloging. 2 days, in the neutral zone. That was a lifetime. Word would spread. A human soldier with a Drakthar child. The hunters would come, from both sides. Let them come, Ethan thought. He'd been the Coalition's perfect soldier once, following orders without question, killing without hesitation. But that man had died at Thermopylae Station. What remained was something else. Something that could save a child who should have been his enemy. Something that could become bloodkin to the last person in the universe who should trust him. Sarah stirred in her sleep, murmuring that word again, the one that had started this impossible journey. Family, in English this time. She was learning, adapting, surviving, just as he would have to learn, adapt, and survive in this new reality where the lines between enemy and family had blurred beyond recognition. The storm outside the station had finally passed, leaving behind an eerie calm that felt like the universe holding its breath. Soon, very soon, that breath would be released in a roar of pursuit and violence. But for now, in this moment, a human soldier stood guard over a Drakthar child, bound by blood debt and something that might, impossibly, become love. The war could wait. Family, however unlikely, could not. The explosion came on the second night. Just as Dr. Lyra had predicted, trouble would find them. The mining station's hull groaned under the impact, and Ethan was moving before the emergency alarms even started wailing. He grabbed his rifle and the go-bag he'd prepared, then rushed to the medical bay where Saris was struggling to sit up, her crimson eyes wide with fear. "Coalition," Lyra asked, already gathering medical supplies with practiced efficiency. Ethan checked his tactical display. 3 ships, running dark but not dark enough. Worse, bounty hunters. Someone's put a price on us. The station shuddered again. Warning shots, meant to disable their defenses without destroying the prize. Professional work. These weren't amateurs looking for quick credits. Saris tried to stand, but her legs buckled. The experiments had left her weaker than she appeared. Without hesitation, Ethan scooped her up, her slight weight nothing compared to the combat gear he was used to carrying. She pressed her face against his shoulder, and he felt her trembling. "Back exit," Lyra said, leading them through a maze of corridors she'd modified over the years. "My ship's in the auxiliary bay. It's not much, but it'll get you clear." "You're coming with us," Ethan said. She shook her head. "They're not after me. Besides, someone needs to slow them down." Another explosion, closer this time. The hunters were getting impatient. Through the station's internal sensors, Ethan could see them cutting through the main airlock. 5 figures in mixed armor, human and Drakthar designs cobbled together. Mercenaries who served neither side, only profit. "There," one of them said, voice amplified through the station's compromised comm system. "The human traitor Cole and the Drakthar brat. 50,000 credits alive, 30 dead. Try not to damage them too much." Saris understood enough English to know they were being hunted. She whispered something in her own language, then switched to broken English. "I fight. Can fight." "No," Ethan said firmly. "You can barely stand." But even as he spoke, he saw something change in her eyes. The fear remained, but beneath it, something else surfaced. The same predatory grace he'd seen in adult Drakthar warriors. She was young, injured, but she was still what her people had evolved to be. Lyra's ship was a converted medical transport, built for speed rather than combat. As Ethan secured Saris in the passenger compartment, Lyra handed him a data pad. "Everything I found about her condition," she said. "The experiments go deeper than I initially thought. Someone was trying to weaponize her abilities, turn her into something. The markers in her blood suggest cognitive enhancement, reflexive augmentation, even attempts at consciousness transfer." Consciousness transfer. They were trying to put something else in her head, or take something out. I can't tell which. The station's lights flickered. The hunters had reached the main corridor. Ethan could hear them moving, professionally spacing themselves to avoid bunching up in kill zones. These weren't the usual dregs that haunted the neutral zone. "Go," Lyra said, sealing the bay doors behind them. I'll buy you time. Ethan wanted to argue, but Saris chose that moment to convulse, purple blood trickling from her nose. Whatever they'd done to her, her body was still fighting it. She needed medical attention beyond what a field kit could provide. The ship's engines roared to life just as the first hunter rounded the corner. Ethan put 3 plasma rounds through the mercenary's chest before the bay doors fully opened, venting the corpse into space. The others would be more careful now. Space around the mining station was cluttered with debris from decades of strip mining. Perfect cover for a small ship. Ethan wove between asteroids and derelict equipment, the hunter's larger vessel struggling to match his maneuvers. But they had one advantage: they knew where he was headed. The only safe port in 3 systems was Meridian Station, a former Drakthar embassy that had declared independence when the war started. Saris had stopped convulsing, but her breathing was labored. She watched him pilot with those unsettling crimson eyes, studying his every movement, as if memorizing them. "Why?" she asked suddenly. "Why save Drakthar?" It was the most complex sentence she'd managed in English, and the question at the heart of their strange situation. Ethan considered his words carefully. "Because you're not Drakthar. You're Saris. You're a child, and children shouldn't pay for their parents' wars." She was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Then, in a smaller voice, "Your child, dead." The question hit like a physical blow. Somehow, she knew, whether from overheard conversations or some Drakthar ability to read emotional resonance. She knew about his loss. "Yes," he said simply. "By Drakthar."
"Yes."
She curled into herself, making herself even smaller. "Then why—" Before he could answer, proximity alarms screamed. The hunters had gotten smart, using a second ship to cut off their route to Meridian. Ethan cursed, throwing the transport into a spiraling dive that would have torn a larger vessel apart. Saris gripped her seat, her knuckles white, but she didn't cry out. The comm system crackled. "Mr. Cole, this is Captain Marcus Thorne of the independent vessel Scavenger. You're carrying stolen Drakthar military property. Surrender the asset and we might let you live." Stolen property. Asset. They didn't even see her as a person. "Counteroffer," Ethan replied, routing power to the ship's modest weapons. "You turn around and I don't blow your reactor core through your hull." Thorne laughed. "You're flying a medical transport with 2 torpedo tubes and a point defense laser. I've got enough firepower to crack a moon." He was right. In a straight fight, they were dead. But Ethan hadn't survived 6 years of war by fighting straight. "Saris," he said quietly, "can you reach that panel? The one marked with the medical cross?" She nodded, unbuckling despite the ship's erratic movements and crawling to the panel. Inside was Lyra's emergency supply kit, including several vials of concentrated stim compounds designed to keep critical patients alive during transport. "The blue ones," Ethan instructed. "Load them into the torpedo tube's chemical dispensers." Her eyes widened in understanding. The stims were highly volatile when exposed to vacuum and heat, not enough to destroy a ship, but enough to create a very convincing explosion. The hunters' ships closed in, confident in their superiority. Ethan waited until they were committed to their attack vectors, then fired both torpedoes at empty space and detonated them early. The chemical reaction created a brilliant blue fireball that temporarily blinded every sensor in a 1,000-kilometer radius. By the time the hunter's vision cleared, Ethan had changed course entirely, diving into the gravity well of a nearby gas giant. The medical transport groaned under the stress, but held together. "Clever." Thorne's voice came through the static. "But you can't hide in there forever. That ship won't survive the deep atmosphere." He was right again, but Ethan wasn't planning to go deep. The gas giant had a small moon, barely more than a captured asteroid, with an abandoned research station. Coalition forces had used it as a listening post before the Drakthar drove them out. It would have automated defenses, but those were designed to target Drakthar signatures. Saris seemed to read his mind. I stay hidden. Ship thinks only human aboard. Can you mask your biosigns? She closed her eyes, and something changed. Her skin grew paler. Her breathing slowed to almost nothing. Even the air around her seemed to cool. It was a survival mechanism, she explained in halting English. Playing dead, essentially. Her people had evolved it to survive in the void between stars during their ancient migrations. The research station's defenses powered up as they approached, scanning aggressively. Ethan transmitted his old Coalition military codes, gambling that nobody had bothered to update a dead station's database. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the weapons powered down, and the docking bay opened. They'd bought time, but not much. The hunters would figure out where they'd gone soon enough. The station was a tomb. Frozen corpses still at their posts where the Drakthar assault had caught them. Ethan tried to shield Saris from the worst of it, but she looked at everything with those ancient eyes, taking it all in. "This is war," she said quietly. "Both sides make death." In the station's medical bay, Ethan found what he was looking for: a military-grade diagnostic scanner. He needed to know exactly what had been done to Saris if he was going to keep her alive. The results were horrifying. Someone had been systematically replacing parts of her nervous system with synthetic alternatives. Not crude cybernetics, but something that grew like living tissue while maintaining programmable parameters. They were trying to create a hybrid, something that could pass for either species, while being controllable by whoever held the activation codes. "Project Synthesis," Saris said, reading over his shoulder. "Mother tried to stop it. They killed her for it." The revelation hung between them. Her mother had died trying to protect her from her own people's experiments, just as his family had died in the crossfire of humanity's war. The station's sensors chimed. The hunters had found them. But something else appeared on the scope. A Drakthar heavy cruiser, emerging from hyperspace with weapons hot. The hunters immediately changed course, but too late. The cruiser's main guns reduced the scavenger to atoms in seconds. The comm system activated, and a deep voice filled the medical bay. "Ethan Cole, you have something that belongs to the Empire. Return the heir immediately, or face the consequences." Heir. Saris wasn't just a Drakthar child. She was royalty. "That's Commander Rethvarn," Saris whispered. And for the first time since he'd found her, she looked truly terrified. "He leads the Shadow Council. He's the one who ordered the experiments." The pieces fell into place. Varn had been experimenting on Saris, likely planning to use her as a puppet ruler he could control. When her mother objected, he'd eliminated her and made it look like a human attack. The bioweapon collar had been his insurance, ensuring she died if she escaped his control. "Mr. Cole," Varn continued, "you have 1 minute to respond before I reduce that station to its component atoms." Ethan looked at Saris, this strange child who had become his responsibility, his ward, his family. In the twisted way war created families from survivors. "What do you want to do?" he asked her. She straightened, and for a moment, he saw the ruler she might become, the strength that no amount of experimentation could create or destroy. "We run," she said, "together." Ethan smiled, the expression feeling foreign on his face. "Then we run." He activated the station's emergency protocols, overloading the reactor while launching every escape pod and emergency beacon. The chaos would buy them minutes at most, but minutes were all they needed. As they raced back to the medical transport, Saris grabbed his hand. "Bloodkin means forever," she said, "even in death. You understand?" "I understand." They launched just as the station's reactor went critical, riding the shockwave out of the gas giant's gravity well. Varn's cruiser, too massive to maneuver quickly, took the brunt of the explosion. It survived, but damaged, buying them the head start they needed. "Where go now?" Saris asked as stars streaked past. Ethan had been thinking about that. There was one place neither the Coalition nor the Drakthar Empire would follow. One place where the war's refugees gathered, where questions weren't asked if you could pay or work. The Wanderer Fleet, he said. Mobile city ships that never stop moving. We can disappear there, at least for a while. Saris nodded, then curled up in her seat, exhaustion finally claiming her. As she slept, she mumbled in her own language, but one word came through clearly. Father. Not bloodkin, not protector, father. Ethan felt something crack inside his chest, a wall he'd built around his heart after Thermopylae. He'd lost a daughter to this war. Now, impossibly, he'd gained another, one with purple blood and crimson eyes, from the species that had taken everything from him. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. Behind them, Varn's damaged cruiser limped back to Drakthar space. But Ethan knew this wasn't over. Varn wouldn't give up. Neither would the Coalition once they learned what Saris represented. The heir to the Drakthar throne, traveling with a human soldier who'd betrayed his own kind to save her. They would be hunted by both sides now, forever caught between two worlds that wanted them dead. But looking at Saris sleeping peacefully, trusting him completely, Ethan found he didn't care. He'd been dead inside for 3 years, going through the motions of a life that had lost all meaning. Now he had purpose again, someone to protect, someone who needed him. The medical transport's computer chimed, calculating their arrival at the Wanderer Fleet's last known position. 6 days through contested space, avoiding patrol routes and military checkpoints. 6 days to figure out how a human soldier and a Drakthar heir could disappear in a galaxy determined to find them. But first, he had a more immediate problem. Saris was growing sicker. Whatever Varn's experiments had done to her, her body was rejecting the synthetic additions. She needed medical attention beyond what he could provide. And the Wanderer Fleet's doctors wouldn't treat a Drakthar without asking questions he couldn't answer. Unless, the idea was insane, but insane had become their new normal. Dr. Lyra had mentioned consciousness transfer technology in Saris's modifications. What if it wasn't about putting something in, but letting something out? What if Saris's natural abilities, the ones that made the Drakthar so feared, were being suppressed? He pulled up the medical files Lyra had given him, studying the neural mapping data. There, buried in the code, was a suppression algorithm. Someone had been keeping Saris's true nature locked away, probably to make her easier to control. Saris, he said gently, waking her. I need you to trust me. She blinked awake, immediately alert despite her exhaustion. Always trust. He explained what he'd found, what he thought might help. Her eyes widened as she understood the implications. If he removed the suppression, she would become what nature intended her to be. A true Drakthar heir, with all the power and hunger that entailed. Might hurt you, she said quietly. Drakthar instinct strong. Might not control. I'll take that chance. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. You saved me twice now. Trust complete. The procedure was delicate, using the transport's limited medical suite to interface with the synthetic neural tissue. One by one, Ethan disabled the suppression protocols, watching as Saris's vital signs fluctuated wildly. Then she screamed, not in pain, but in release. Something fundamental shifted in her presence, a predatory aura that made every human instinct scream danger. Her eyes blazed brighter, her pale skin seemed to shimmer, and when she moved, it was with a fluid grace that defied physics. She looked at him, and for a moment, he saw hunger in those crimson eyes, the hunger that made the Drakthar feared across the galaxy. Then she blinked, and it was just Saris again, scared and young and grateful. I feel, she said, wonder in her voice. Everything. I feel everything. The shadow sense, she explained. The ability to perceive emotional resonance, to taste fear and courage, love and hate. It was overwhelming after years of suppression, but she was learning to filter it. "You," she said, focusing on him. "You taste like storm and sorrow and steel, but underneath, warmth, hidden but there." It was the most anyone had seen of him in years. The days passed in a blur of evasion and survival. Saris grew stronger, her abilities manifesting in unexpected ways. She could sense ships before they appeared on scanners, feel the intentions of pilots light years away. It saved them more than once from coalition patrols and Drakthar scouts. But it also showed her the truth of the war, the fear and hatred on both sides, the pain that drove the endless cycle of violence. She would curl up after particularly intense episodes, overwhelmed by the suffering she could feel across the void. "How stop it?" she asked one night, as they hid in the sensor shadow of a derelict battleship. "How make peace when everyone tastes like pain?" Ethan didn't have an answer. The war had been raging for longer than Saris had been alive, longer than he'd been a soldier. It had become the only reality either species knew. But looking at her, this impossible bridge between two worlds, he wondered if maybe that could change. If a human could become bloodkin to a Drakthar heir, if a child could see past the hatred to the pain beneath, perhaps peace wasn't as impossible as everyone believed. The Wanderer fleet appeared on their sensors like a constellation of hope. Dozens of ships moving in careful formation through the void, home to millions who'd fled the war. It was civilization's last neutral ground. As they approached, Saris took his hand. "Whatever comes," she said. Her English much improved. "We face together. Family." "Family," Ethan agreed and meant it. They were about to dock when the proximity alarm screamed again. Not hunters this time. Not Drakthar or coalition. Something else. Something worse. A ship unlike anything in either fleet's database emerged from hyperspace. Its hull, a writhing mass of organic technology that hurt to look at. It broadcast on all frequencies. A message that made Saris convulse in pain and Ethan's blood run cold. "Project synthesis activation confirmed. Retrieving primary asset. Resistance will result in termination of all life in this sector." Varn hadn't just been experimenting on Saris. He'd been preparing her for something else. Something that had just arrived to claim her. The alien ship pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that made Saris writhe in agony. Each pulse seemed to dig deeper into her consciousness, trying to activate something buried in the synthetic neural tissue. Ethan grabbed the manual controls, killing their approach vector and throwing the medical transport into a desperate evasive pattern. "Can you block it?" he shouted over her screams. Saris pressed her palms against her temples, purple blood trickling from her nose. "It's inside. The modifications, they're responding to it." The Wanderer fleet was already reacting, their defensive formations shifting to face this new threat. But Ethan knew they stood no chance. Whatever this thing was, it existed outside their understanding of technology or biology. The comm system crackled with an unfamiliar voice. Neither human nor Drakthar. "Asset designation Saris 9 Prime. Your genetic template has been prepared for integration. Submit to retrieval or witness the termination of 10,000 souls." To emphasize the point, a tendril of energy lashed out from the alien ship, striking one of the Wanderer fleet's smaller vessels. The ship didn't explode. It simply ceased, every atom unraveling in seconds, leaving nothing but void where hundreds of refugees had been. "Stop!" Saris managed to scream. "I'll come. Just stop killing them." "Negative," the voice responded. "You will come, and demonstrations will continue until compliance is absolute." Another tendril reached out, and another ship died. Ethan watched the fleet scatter, but there was nowhere to run. The alien ship existed partially in hyperspace, able to strike anywhere within several light seconds instantaneously. But something in the voice's phrasing caught his attention. It wanted compliance, not just retrieval. Whatever Project Synthesis was meant to create, It needed Saris as a willing participant, or at least a broken one. "Saris," he said, forcing his voice to remain calm. "Remember what you said about feeling everything. Can you feel that ship?" She looked at him through pain-glazed eyes, understanding dawning. "It's empty. No life. No consciousness. Just programming." "Then it can be hacked." The medical transport's computers were basic, but they had one advantage: Dr. Lyra's modifications. She'd installed black market interfaces for treating various species, including some that weren't supposed to exist. If the alien ship was partially synthetic, partially organic, there might be a way to confuse it. Ethan pulled up the neural suppression codes he'd disabled in Saris. Instead of reactivating them, he inverted them, creating a feedback loop that would broadcast Saris's Drakthar signature in thousands of variations. "This is going to hurt," he warned. "Already hurts," she gasped. "Do it." He activated the program, and suddenly, the space around them filled with ghost signatures. To the alien ship's sensors, there were now 10,000 versions of Saris scattered throughout the fleet. The tendrils of energy paused, confused by the sudden multiplication of their target. The Wanderer fleet didn't waste the opportunity. Every ship capable of jump drove engaged simultaneously, scattering in different directions. The medical transport, too small for a jump drive, dove into the chaos. "Adaptation in progress," the alien voice announced. "Countermeasures will be complete in 3 minutes. Asset retrieval will resume." 3 minutes. Ethan scanned the fleeing ships, looking for something, anything that could help. There, a heavy freighter with Drakthar markings but flying Wanderer colors. A defector's ship, someone who'd abandoned the Empire for freedom. He hailed them on a narrow beam transmission. "This is Ethan Cole. I have the Drakthar heir. Grant us sanctuary and she'll remember your aid when this war ends." The response came in accented English. "This is Captain Kalen Rost, formerly of the Drakthar Third Fleet. The heir is dead, killed by humans at forward base Sigma 9. "She lives," Saris said, forcing herself to speak despite the pain. She switched to rapid Drakthar, words Ethan couldn't understand, but recognized as some kind of authentication code. There was a long pause. Then Rost's voice returned, shaken. "Blood of the Empire! It's true. Dock immediately. We're jumping in 60 seconds." The docking was rough, the transport scraping against the freighter's hull as Ethan forced the connection. They had barely sealed the airlock when the jump drives engaged. Reality, stretching, and compressing as they punched through hyperspace. Saris collapsed the moment they were aboard, her body finally giving in to the strain. Ethan caught her, cradling her small form as Captain Rost approached. The Drakthar defector was older than most warriors Ethan had encountered, his pale gray skin marked with scars that told stories of countless battles. "The heir lives," Rost said, wonder and fear mixing in his voice. "And travels with a human. The universe has gone mad." "The universe was already mad," Ethan replied. "We're just trying to survive it." Rost led them to the freighter's medical bay, which was surprisingly well equipped. As Ethan laid Saris on the examination table, he noticed Rost's crew, a mix of species, human and Drakthar, working side by side, defectors and deserters, all fleeing a war that had consumed everything else. "You're not the only one who's crossed lines," Rost observed, following his gaze. "The war creates strange alliances among those who refuse to fight it." While the ship's medic, a human woman named Sarah, tended to Saris, Rost pulled Ethan aside. "That thing that attacked the fleet. I've seen something like it before, 20 years ago, before the war truly began. A joint research project between our species, back when we still pretended peace was possible." "Project Synthesis." Rost's eyes widened. "You know of it. Then you know what they were trying to create. A hybrid consciousness, neither human nor Drakthar, that could forcibly merge our species into something new. The project was abandoned when the test subjects went insane. Apparently someone didn't abandon it. Varn. Rost spat the name like a curse. He was part of the original research team. Brilliant, ruthless, and convinced that evolution required force. When the project was shut down, he vanished into the Empire's shadow operations. Saris stirred on the medical table, her eyes fluttering open. He killed my mother, she said weakly. She discovered he'd restarted the project, using me as the primary subject. The throne's bloodline carries specific genetic markers that make synthesis possible. But why make it look like a human attack? Ethan asked. To escalate the war, Rost answered. The more we fight, the more desperate both sides become for a solution. Eventually, they'd accept anything, even forced evolution, to end the bloodshed. Varn positions himself as the savior, who can merge both species into something greater. Except he needs me alive for it to work, Saris added. The throne's blood is the key. Without it, the synthesis kills everyone it touches. The freighter shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace. They'd emerged in a dead system, a graveyard of planets stripped bare by ancient mining operations. Good cover, but not a permanent solution. We can't run forever, Sarah said, finishing her examination of Saris. Whatever they did to her, it's killing her slowly. The synthetic neural tissue is rejecting her organic systems. She needs the original project synthesis data to reverse the process. Which means going back to where it all started, Rost said grimly. The Nexus Laboratory, in the contested zone between Empire and Coalition space. Ethan knew the place. Everyone did. It was where the war had truly begun, when a diplomatic summit turned into a massacre. Nobody went there anymore. The space was haunted by automated defense systems from both sides, turning it into a death trap for any ship that approached. It's suicide, he said. Yes, Rost agreed. But it's also where Varn will never expect you to go. And if the original research data is anywhere, it's there. Saris tried to sit up, her determination overcoming her weakness. I won't let more people die for me. If going to the Nexus can stop this, can stop Varn, then we go. You can barely stand, Ethan protested. Then you'll carry me, she said simply. Bloodkin means we face death together, remember? Over the next 3 days, they prepared, Rost's crew, initially suspicious of harboring both the Drakthar heir and a human soldier, gradually warmed to them. Saris, despite her pain, learned the names of every crew member, listened to their stories of loss and survival. She had a gift for making people feel seen, valued, regardless of species. Ethan watched her with a mixture of pride and sorrow. She was growing up too fast, forced to be a leader when she should have been playing with toys. But war didn't care about childhood. One evening, as they approached the contested zone, Saris found him cleaning his rifle in the cargo bay. You're scared, she observed, her shadow sense picking up his emotions. Always am before a mission, he admitted. Fear keeps you sharp. Not scared of dying, scared of losing me. He set down the rifle, looking at this strange child who'd become his family. Yes, I'm scared too, she said, sitting beside him. Not of dying, of becoming what Varn wants, a weapon to end both our peoples. That won't happen. How do you know? Ethan thought about it, then pulled out something he'd kept hidden since Thermopylae Station. A small, hollow projector, containing the last images of his wife and daughter. This was Lily, he said, showing Saris the recording of a young girl laughing. My daughter. She was about your age when she died. Saris studied the image with those ancient crimson eyes. She looked kind, happy. She was... And you know what she taught me? That people choose who they become. Every day, every moment, we choose. Varn can't make you a weapon unless you choose to be one. What if I don't have a choice? What if the synthesis takes over? Then, I'll remind you who you are. Saris. Not a weapon, not a tool, not an experiment. Just Saris, who calls me family and teaches hardened soldiers that enemy children deserve saving. She leaned against him. This alien child who'd filled a void he thought would consume him. Tell me more about Lily. So he did, sharing memories he'd locked away for 3 years. Stories of bedtime rituals and birthday parties, of scraped knees and proud moments. Saris listened to every word, and through her shadow sense, she felt the love that still lived beneath his grief. She would have liked me, Saris asked when he finished. She would have loved you, Ethan said, and meant it. The Nexus laboratory loomed before them like a metallic corpse, its massive structure torn open by the violence of that first betrayal. Automated weapons platforms from both fleets circled it like vultures, programmed to destroy anything that approached. How do we get through? Sarah asked, studying the defensive grid. We don't, Rost said. We go under. He explained his plan. The laboratory's lower levels extended into subspace, a failed experiment in dimensional engineering. The portals were unstable, dangerous, but they bypassed the conventional defenses. One problem, Sarah noted. Subspace exposure causes cellular breakdown in most species. We'd have minutes at most. Not Drakthar, Sarah said quietly. We evolved in void spaces between stars. Subspace feels like home. But you're half synthetic now, Ethan pointed out. We don't know how the modifications will react. Only one way to find out. They took a shuttle, just Ethan, Saris, and Rost. The others would wait, ready to extract them if they survived. As they approached the subspace entry point, reality began to blur. Colors that shouldn't exist bled through the viewports, and Ethan felt his teeth ache from resonances human bodies weren't meant to experience. Saris, however, seemed to come alive. The pain that had racked her for days eased, and she moved with renewed grace. I can feel it, she whispered. The synthesis programming. It's weaker here. Subspace interferes with the control signals. They docked with the laboratory's lower ring, the structure groaning from years of neglect. Inside, emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red. Bodies, human and Drakthar, lay where they'd fallen during that first betrayal, preserved by the vacuum. This way. Rost led them through corridors he remembered from decades past. The main research vault should be intact. They found it behind blast doors that had been sealed from the inside. Someone had tried to protect the research, or prevent its escape. Ethan cut through with plasma charges, while Saris kept watch, her enhanced senses alert for danger. The vault was a monument to ambition and horror. Tanks filled with failed experiments lined the walls. Creatures that were neither human nor Drakthar, but something twisted between. At the center, a massive computer core hummed with residual power. The original project synthesis data, Rost breathed. Everything they learned, everything they created. Saris approached the core, her hand hovering over the interface. I can feel echoes. Others like me. They all died screaming. You don't have to do this, Ethan said. Yes, I do. She touched the interface and screamed. Data flooded through her synthetic neural tissue, terabytes of information forcing itself into her consciousness. Ethan caught her as she convulsed, her body temperature dropping dangerously as her Drakthar physiology went into survival mode. Through the pain, she gasped out fragments. Varn changed it, not merger, domination, one consciousness, controlling all. Him. The pieces clicked together. Varn didn't want to merge the species. He wanted to control them, using Saris's royal bloodline as the carrier wave for his consciousness. Every human, every Drakthar, would become extensions of his will. Can you stop it? Ethan asked. Not stop. Change. Her eyes blazed with determination. If I accept the synthesis, I can rewrite it. Make it what it was supposed to be. True merger. Willing participants only. Bridge between species. Not chain. That could kill you. Already dying, she reminded him. At least this way, Death means something. Before he could protest, alarms shrieked through the laboratory. On the monitors, Varn's cruiser emerged from hyperspace, accompanied by a full battle fleet. "Ah, Mr. Cole," Varn's voice echoed through the station. "Thank you for bringing the air exactly where I needed her. The laboratory systems will complete what I started. She'll become the core of a new order, with me as its guiding will." The alien ship from before materialized alongside Varn's fleet, its organic hull pulsing with anticipation. It wasn't just a retrieval vessel, it was an amplifier, designed to broadcast the synthesis across inhabited space. "Run," Sarah said, pushing Ethan away. "Take the data and run." "Not without you." Bloodkin doesn't mean dying together. It means living for each other. She smiled through the pain. "You saved me, gave me family when I had none. Now let me save everyone else." The laboratory systems were activating, responding to Varn's remote commands. But Saris was already connected, her consciousness spreading through the network like wildfire. Where Varn's programming tried to dominate, she offered choice. Where it tried to control, she provided freedom. "Interesting," she said, her voice taking on harmonic overtones as the synthesis began. He never understood. Power isn't taking, it's giving. The transformation was beginning. Her body became translucent, energy rather than matter, as the synthesis converted her into something beyond either species. But in her eyes, Ethan still saw Saris, the frightened child he'd saved, the determined girl who'd become his daughter in all but blood. "Tell them," she said, her voice echoing across dimensions. "Tell both sides that peace is possible, that a child of war chose love over hate, that enemies can become family." The laboratory exploded with light as two versions of Project Synthesis went to war. Varn's domination against Saris's liberation. The alien ship writhed, its systems overloading as conflicting commands tore through its consciousness. Ethan grabbed the data core and ran. Rost beside him as the laboratory came apart around them. They reached the shuttle just as the superstructure began to collapse, launching into space as reality itself seemed to fracture behind them. Through the viewport, Ethan watched Saris's transformed state battle with the alien ship, two interpretations of evolution clashing in displays that hurt to perceive. She was winning, he realized. Her version, built on sacrifice and choice rather than control, was stronger. Varn's fleet opened fire on the laboratory, trying to destroy Saris before she could complete the transformation. But it was too late. The synthesis had taken hold, spreading not as domination, but as invitation. Across both fleets, individuals began to feel it. The option to connect, to understand, to become more than their species' limitations. Some accepted, others refused, but all were given the choice. "She's doing it," Rost whispered in awe. "She's ending the war." Not ending, Ethan thought. Transforming. The war would continue for those who chose it. But now, there was another option. A bridge between species, built from a child sacrifice. The transformation of Saris into pure synthesis energy lit up every sensor within 3 systems. Ethan watched from the shuttle's viewport as his adopted daughter became something beyond physical form, her consciousness spreading like a web of light between the warring fleets. Where her energy touched, weapons powered down. Soldiers on both sides reported the same phenomenon, suddenly feeling the emotions of their enemies, understanding their fear, their loss, their desperate desire for the war to end. But Varn wasn't finished. Predictable. His voice crackled over every communication channel simultaneously. The air believes in choice, in freedom. But freedom is chaos. Order requires control. The alien amplifier ship, wounded, but not destroyed, began to pulse with a different frequency. Where Saris offered connection, it imposed dominion. The battle wasn't just physical anymore. It was a war of philosophies fought in the consciousness of every sentient being within range. "We need to get to the spire of 10,000 wings," Rost said urgently, pulling Ethan from his vigil. "The Drakthar throne world's orbital fortress. If Varn is controlling this, that's where he'll be. The spire has the transmission arrays to broadcast his version across the galaxy." "Saris needs help," Ethan said, watching her energy form flicker as she fought against Varn's corruption. "Then we give it to her by stopping him at the source." The shuttle was too small for what came next. They needed firepower, speed, and allies. Fortunately, Saris's transformation was having an unexpected effect. Ships from both fleets were breaking formation, their crews touched by her gift of empathy. For the first time in decades, humans and Drakthar were talking instead of shooting. Ethan opened a wideband transmission. "This is Ethan Cole. Some of you know me as a traitor, others as the one who saved the Drakthar heir. The truth is both and neither. I'm a father trying to save his daughter, and she's trying to save all of us. Varn wants to enslave both species. Help us stop him." The response was immediate and surprising. A coalition destroyer responded first. "This is Captain Maria Santos. My tactical officer just felt the terror of the Drakthar children on the ship we were targeting. We can't do this anymore. What do you need?" More ships joined the impromptu alliance. Drakthar vessels whose crews had felt human grief. Human ships whose soldiers had experienced Drakthar honor. Not everyone was convinced, but enough were. Enough to matter. The journey to the Drakthar throne world should have been impossible. It was the most heavily defended position in the Empire, surrounded by automated defense platforms and fleet elements. But Saris's transformation had thrown everything into chaos. Some defenses fired on the approaching Allied fleet. Others, their operators touched by synthesis, stood down. The spire of 10,000 wings hung in orbit, like a crystalline mountain inverted against the stars. Its surfaces reflected the light of the throne world below, creating an aurora of colors that would have been beautiful if not for the weapons platforms bristling from every surface. "Varn's there," Rost confirmed, reading the tactical display. "Top level, the throne room itself. He's declared himself emperor in the absence of the heir." "The queen?" Ethan asked, remembering that Saris's mother had been killed, but not knowing about her grandmother. "In stasis. Varn claimed she was infected by human bioweapons and needed isolation. A convenient excuse to remove the only one who could challenge his authority." The Allied fleet engaged the spire's defenses, a mixture of human and Drakthar ships fighting side by side for the first time in history. But the fortress was designed to repel entire armadas. They were buying time, nothing more. "Small team," Ethan decided. "We infiltrate while the fleet distracts them." "Suicide." Sarah, the medic, said bluntly. She'd insisted on coming, claiming someone needed to keep them alive long enough to be heroes. "Everything we've done has been suicide," Ethan replied. "We're still here." The insertion team was small. Ethan, Rost, Sarah, and 3 volunteers from the Allied crews. 2 humans, 1 Drakthar, all touching Saris's synthesis enough to work together, but not enough to lose themselves. They used a stealth pod, launching from Rost's freighter during the chaos of the fleet engagement. The Spire's shields were focused on capital ship weapons, allowing the tiny pod to slip through. They docked at a maintenance port, unused and forgotten in the fortress's vast structure. Inside, the Spire was eerily quiet. Most of the garrison was at battle stations, leaving the corridors empty except for automated patrols. They moved quickly. Sarah's medical scanner repurposed to detect life signs, while Rost's knowledge of Drakthar architecture guided them through the labyrinthine passages. They were halfway to the throne room when they encountered the first of Varn's special forces. Not regular Drakthar warriors, but hybrids like Saris had been, partially synthetic, partially organic, completely under Varn's control. The fight was brutal. These weren't soldiers making choices. They were extensions of Varn's will, feeling no pain, no fear, no hesitation. One of the human volunteers fell, his throat torn out by elongated Drakthar claws. The other barely survived. Sarah's emergency medical foam the only thing keeping his organs inside his body. "Go!" the wounded man gasped. "Stop him! For the girl!" They left him in a secure alcove with a weapon and what medical supplies they could spare. 3 levels later, they lost the Drakthar volunteer to a trap that filled a corridor with monofilament wire. She died instantly, cut into pieces too small to recognize. By the time they reached the throne room's antechamber, it was just Ethan, Rost, and Sarah. 3 people against an emperor and his elite guard. "I should mention," Sarah said, checking her pistol's charge. "I'm not actually a medic, I'm Coalition Intelligence. Was sent to spy on Rost's operation." "And now," Ethan asked. "Now, I'm someone who felt a child's hope for peace and decided it was worth more than any government's agenda." The throne room doors were massive, carved from a single piece of Drakthar crystal that resonated with harmonic frequencies. As they approached, the doors opened on their own, Varn's invitation to enter. The throne room was a study in contrasts. Ancient Drakthar architecture merged with cutting-edge technology. At its center sat Varn, not on the throne, but in a technological web that connected him to the spire's systems. His body was more machine than flesh now, cables running from his skull to the amplification arrays. Around him stood a dozen hybrid guards, their faces blank, their wills subsumed. "Ethan Cole," Varn said, his voice echoing from speakers throughout the room. "The human who thinks he can save a species by loving a child. How pathetically sentimental." "Where's the queen?" Rost demanded. Varn gestured to a stasis pod beside the throne. Inside, an elderly Drakthar woman floated in suspension, her life signs barely registering. Alive, technically, though her mind has been quite useful. Royal command codes, genetic authentication, all the little keys to power that bloodline provides. "Saris is the rightful heir," Ethan said. "Your claim is illegitimate." "Saris is an energy pattern dispersing through space," Varn countered. "Soon, she'll be nothing but background radiation. Meanwhile, my synthesis will endure, not offering choice, but imposing order. Both species united under a single will, mine." The guards moved forward, their movements perfectly synchronized. Ethan, Rost, and Sarah formed a defensive triangle, but they were vastly outnumbered. Then Ethan felt it, a familiar presence, like warm sunlight on his consciousness. Saris, still fighting, still aware. She couldn't speak, couldn't manifest physically, but she could share her strength. "You feel that?" he asked the others. "Yeah," Sarah breathed. "She's still with us." The fight erupted with devastating violence. The hybrid guards were faster, stronger, more coordinated. But Ethan and his allies had something they didn't choose: free will, the ability to adapt, to surprise, to sacrifice. Sarah went down first, taking 3 guards with her, using improvised explosives she'd hidden in her medical supplies. Her last words were, "Tell the kid she gave me something to believe in." Rost fought like the warrior he'd once been. Decades of experience against opponents who only knew Varn's tactical programming. He killed 4 before a blade found his heart. As he died, he pressed a device into Ethan's hand. "Throne room emergency lockdown. 30 seconds once activated. Make them count." Ethan was alone now, facing Varn and his remaining guards. His rifle was empty, his body battered, but he still had the device. And more importantly, he could feel Saris gathering her strength for something. "You can't win," Varn said, not moving from his technological web. "Even if you kill me, the synthesis is already spreading. My version will overwrite the heirs eventually." "Maybe," Ethan admitted, activating the lockdown. Blast shields slammed down, sealing the throne room. "But you're forgetting something." "What?" "Saris isn't alone." Through the synthesis connection Saris had created, Ethan could feel them. Thousands of beings, human and Drakthar, who had accepted her gift, not controlled, not dominated, but connected. And through that connection, they were lending her their strength. The throne room's windows exploded inward as Saris manifested, not as the child she'd been, but as something transcendent. Energy given form by will and love, and the desperate hope of two species tired of war. "Hello, Commander," she said, her voice harmonizing with itself. "You wanted to use me as a weapon. Congratulations. You succeeded." She moved faster than thought, her energy form passing through the hybrid guards. Where she touched them, Varn's control shattered, replaced by free will. Some collapsed, overwhelmed by suddenly feeling again. Others turned on their master, rage at what had been done to them overcoming everything else. Varn tried to run, but the lockdown he'd never expected trapped him. Ethan intercepted him at the throne, and for a moment, they stood face to face. The architect of horror and the soldier who'd chosen love over hate. "You could have had peace," Ethan said. "Peace is weakness," Varn snarled, pulling a concealed blade. The fight was brief. Varn had sacrificed his combat skills for technological integration. Ethan hadn't. The blade meant for Ethan's heart ended up in Varn's throat. As Varn died, his technological web sparked and failed. The corrupted synthesis signal ceased, leaving only Saris's version spreading through space. Choice, not control. Understanding, not domination. Saris's energy form solidified beside the throne, looking more real than she had since the transformation began. "It's done," she said, exhaustion clear in her voice. "But I can't hold this form much longer. The synthesis is taking everything I have." "Then stop," Ethan said. "You've done enough. More than enough." "Can't. If I stop, both versions fail. The connection breaks. The war resumes." She smiled sadly. "This is what I was meant for. To be a bridge. Bridges don't get to cross to either side." "That's not true." Ethan moved to the Queen's stasis pod, using Varn's severed hand to activate the biometric locks. The pod opened, and the Queen of the Drakthar Empire took her first free breath in months. She was elderly, but far from frail. Her crimson eyes took in the carnage, her transformed granddaughter, and the human soldier standing protective beside her. "You're the one who saved her," the Queen said. It wasn't a question. "We saved each other," Ethan replied. The Queen approached Saris's flickering form. "Child, you've carried this burden alone long enough. The synthesis doesn't need one bridge. It needs many." She touched Saris's energy form, and something passed between them. Royal authority, genetic authentication, the accumulated power of the Drakthar throne. But more than that, acceptance, love, the acknowledgement that Saris's choice had been the right one. "I hereby decree," the Queen announced, her voice carrying through the Spire's communication systems to both fleets, "that Commander Varn was a traitor to both our species. The synthesis offered by my granddaughter is not mandatory but welcomed. Those who choose connection will be honored. Those who choose separation will be respected. The war ends now, not in victory or defeat, but in understanding." Saris's form stabilized, drawing power from the thousands accepting her gift. She wasn't dying anymore, but she wasn't quite living either, suspended between states, maintaining the bridge between species. "I need anchors," she said. "People on both sides to help maintain the connection, to ensure it remains choice, not compulsion." "I volunteer," Ethan said immediately. "As do I," the Queen added. Others volunteered through the synthesis connection. Captain Santos from the Coalition destroyer, surviving members of Rost's crew, soldiers and civilians who had lost everything to war and wanted to build something from the ashes. The transformation was gentler this time. Ethan felt the synthesis integrate with his being, not replacing his humanity, but augmenting it. He could feel the network of consciousness Saris maintained, the growing web of understanding between former enemies. But he remained himself, still the quiet soldier who had chosen to save a child. "Father," Saris said, and for the first time since her transformation, she seemed truly present. "I can feel both sides now. The fear is fading. Understanding is growing. It will take time, but peace is possible." "Then we'll give it time," Ethan promised. The fleets separated without further violence. Ships returned to their respective spaces, but now with crew members who could feel their enemies' emotions, understand their motivations. The war didn't end instantly, but it began to wind down. Battles became negotiations. Hatred became curiosity. Fear became hope. Ethan stood on the observation deck of the Spire, watching ships from both fleets depart. The Queen stood beside him. This unlikely alliance of human and Drakthar bound by love for the same child. "She can't maintain this forever," the Queen observed. "The synthesis requires too much energy. Eventually, she'll have to choose. Return to physical form and let the connection fade, or remain as the bridge until it consumes her." "Then we'd better make the most of the time she's giving us," Ethan replied. "Build actual peace so the synthesis becomes unnecessary." "A human and the Drakthar Queen working together. Your species would call this impossible." "My species once thought flying was impossible. We got over it." The Queen smiled, an expression that looked strange on Drakthar features, but genuine nonetheless. "You would have made a good Drakthar, Ethan Cole. And you'd have made a decent human, Your Majesty." They stood in comfortable silence. Two former enemies united by the most powerful force in any universe, love, for a child who had chosen to save everyone, even at the cost of herself. In the synthesis network, Ethan felt Saris's presence, warm and reassuring. She was scattered across light years, but also right there, as close as thought. His daughter in every way that mattered, even if she no longer had a form he could hold. "We'll find a way," he promised her through the connection. "A way to bring you back without losing what you've built." "I know," she replied, her voice echoing in his mind. "Because you're my father, and fathers always find a way to save their daughters." The Spire of 10,000 Wings, once a symbol of Drakthar dominance, began its transformation into something new. A neutral ground where both species could meet, learn, and maybe, eventually, become something greater together. The war was ending not with plasma and death, but with understanding and choice. All because a quiet soldier had saved an enemy child, and she had chosen to call him family. 6 months had passed since the siege of Drakthar Spire, and the galaxy struggled to adjust to its new reality. The war hadn't ended with treaties or surrenders, but with something far more profound: understanding. Through Saris's synthesis network, former enemies could feel each other's pain, joy, and hope. It didn't create instant peace, but it made hatred much harder to sustain. Ethan stood in what had once been the Spire's war room, now converted into a medical research facility. Doctors from both species worked side by side, studying the synthesis phenomenon and, more importantly, searching for a way to stabilize Saris's condition. She maintained her energy form most of the time now, manifesting physically only for brief periods before the strain became too much. "The cellular degradation is accelerating," Dr. Amara Okonkwo reported, her dark fingers dancing over a holographic display showing Saris's biorhythms. She was one of Earth's foremost xenobiologists, recruited specifically for this project. "Every time she manifests physically, she loses cohesion at the quantum level. We're running out of time." The Queen entered the room, her bearing still regal despite the informal setting. In the months since her liberation, she'd become one of the strongest advocates for peace, using her authority to quell Drakthar factions that resisted the new order. "Any progress?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "We've identified the problem," Dr. Okonkwo explained. The synthesis requires a massive amount of energy to maintain. Saris is essentially burning through her life force to keep the connection stable. But there might be a solution. She pulled up another display, this one showing a complex molecular structure. This is from Commander Varn's research. He was developing a way to make the synthesis self-sustaining by creating what he called synthesis nodes, individuals who could maintain local networks without draining a central source. Varn's research was abomination, the Queen said flatly. His methods were, Ethan agreed. But the science might save Saris. Before they could discuss further, alerts began flashing across the room's displays. Something was happening in the synthesis network. Ethan felt it through his connection. A disturbance, like someone screaming in a crowded room. Saris materialized in the center of the room, her form more solid than it had been in weeks. But something was wrong. Her eyes, usually warm crimson, now flickered with an unhealthy purple light. "Father!" she gasped, and Ethan was at her side instantly. "Something's wrong. There's another signal in the network. It's trying to take control." The displays around them erupted with data. Across 3 systems, synthesis nodes were reporting anomalies. People connected to the network were experiencing shared nightmares, visions of conquest and domination. "Varn," the Queen breathed. "It's not possible. He died." "His body died," Dr. Okonkwo corrected, studying the readings with growing alarm. But he'd integrated so deeply with the Spire's systems. If any part of his consciousness survived in the network, they didn't need her to finish. A digital ghost of Varn, spreading through the synthesis like a virus. Everything they'd built, all the progress toward peace, was under threat. "Can we purge him?" Ethan asked. "Not without destroying the entire network," Dr. Okonkwo replied. "He's embedded himself too deeply. It would be like trying to remove cancer that spread to every organ." Saris doubled over in pain, purple veins spreading across her translucent skin. "He's using the network's own structure against me. Every person connected becomes a battleground." Reports flooded in from across the galaxy. On mining colonies where humans and Drakthar had begun working together, violence erupted as synthesis-connected individuals turned on each other. Hospital ships reported patients experiencing seizures. The carefully built peace was crumbling. "There is another way," Saris said quietly, straightening despite the obvious pain. "But you won't like it," she explained, her voice growing weaker with each word. The synthesis network existed in a quantum state, neither fully material nor entirely energy. Varn's consciousness had found refuge in that liminal space. To purge him, someone would need to enter that space fully, abandoning physical form entirely. "You're not doing it," Ethan said immediately. "I'm already half there," she pointed out. "And I'm the only one with the genetic markers to control the network's core functions. There has to be another way." But even as he said it, he knew there wasn't. They'd searched for months for alternatives. This crisis had simply accelerated the inevitable choice Saris would have to make. The Queen placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Perhaps there is another way. Not to avoid the sacrifice, but to share it." She turned to Dr. Okonkwo. "You mentioned synthesis nodes. What if we created them deliberately, volunteers who could help maintain the network, reducing the strain on any single individual?" "It's theoretically possible," the doctor admitted, "but the transformation would be permanent. Those who became nodes would be changed at the fundamental level. Neither fully human nor Drakthar anymore." "I volunteer," Ethan said without hesitation. "As do I," the Queen added. Over the next hour, as Varn's influence spread through the network, more volunteers came forward. Captain Santos, who'd been the first to answer Ethan's call for help. Former soldiers from both sides, who'd lost everything to the war and found new purpose in peace. Even some of Varn's former hybrid guards, free of his control and seeking redemption. Dr. Okonkwo worked frantically to prepare the synthesis chamber, a modification of Varn's own technology, but designed for willing transformation rather than forced conversion. The process would be painful, irreversible, and potentially fatal. But it was their only chance. As the volunteers gathered, Saris pulled Ethan aside. Despite her energy form, she felt solid when she hugged him, a daughter embracing her father one last time. "You don't have to do this," she said. "You've already given enough." "Family doesn't keep score," he replied, returning the embrace. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't get lonely in there." The transformation chamber was a sphere of crystallized energy fields, humming with power drawn from the spire's core. One by one, the volunteers entered, their bodies beginning to change the moment they crossed the threshold. It wasn't painful, exactly, but it was overwhelming. Every nerve ending fired at once. Every synapse exploded with sensation. Ethan was the last to enter, pausing at the threshold to look back at the physical world one last time. He thought of Lily, his first daughter, lost to war. He thought of Saris, his second daughter, about to be lost to peace. The universe did indeed have a cruel sense of humor. Then he stepped through. The quantum space was nothing like he'd expected. It wasn't empty or abstract, but filled with streams of consciousness, rivers of thought and emotion flowing between millions of connected minds. He could feel them all, humans filled with ancient fears, Drakthar struggling with new empathy, and there, at the center, Saris fighting alone against Varn's corruption. She wasn't alone anymore. The volunteers spread through the network like antibodies, each becoming a focal point that drew Varn's attacks. The Queen, with her royal authority, commanded loyalty from Drakthar nodes. Captain Santos rallied the human connections, and Ethan went straight for Varn himself. He found him in a pocket of corrupted data, no longer resembling anything human or Drakthar. Varn had become pure will, a cancer of consciousness determined to consume everything. "You again," Varn's presence sneered. "The soldier who thinks love conquers all." "No," Ethan replied, feeling the support of the entire network behind him. "The father who knows it does." The battle wasn't physical. It couldn't be in a space where physics didn't apply. It was a contest of will, of purpose, of belief. Varn fought with the desperate hunger of someone who'd sacrificed everything for power. Ethan fought with the calm certainty of someone who'd sacrificed everything for family. Around them, the network itself began to choose. Each connected consciousness had to decide Varn's promise of order through domination, or Saris's offer of peace through understanding. The choice rippled through millions of minds, and overwhelmingly, they chose Saris. Varn's scream of rage echoed through quantum space as the network rejected him, his consciousness fragmenting as the connections he'd tried to corrupt turned against him. But in his last moment, he managed one final act of spite. The feedback pulse he generated struck directly at Saris's core, the part of her that maintained the network's stability. She cried out, her form flickering, fading. "No." Ethan reached for her, his transformed consciousness wrapping around hers, sharing his strength, his life force, everything he had. "Father, stop," she gasped. "You'll die." "Then we die together. That's what family does." But the other nodes wouldn't let that happen. The Queen's strength flowed into them, then Santos's, then every volunteer who'd made the transformation. The network itself, millions of conscious beings choosing connection over isolation, poured their collective will into saving the child who'd saved them all. Varn's final attack dissipated. His consciousness finally, truly ended. But the effort had changed something fundamental. The network no longer needed a single anchor. It had become self-sustaining, maintained by thousands of voluntary nodes across the galaxy. And in the center of it all, something new was forming. "Ethan!" Dr. Okonkwo's voice reached them through the quantum space. "Something's happening. The synthesis chamber is evolving." Through their connection to the physical world, They could sense it. The chamber's energy fields were restructuring, creating something unprecedented, a stable gateway between quantum space and physical reality. "It's possible," Saris breathed, understanding dawning. "We don't have to choose. We can exist in both states." One by one, the volunteers began to manifest in the chamber, but not as they had been. They were transformed, carrying traces of their quantum existence into physical form. Their eyes held depths that hadn't been there before, their presence carrying an echo of the vast network they were now part of. Ethan materialized last, his hand still holding Saris's, as she too returned to physical form. But she was different now. The purple corruption was gone, replaced by a subtle luminescence that made her seem to glow from within. She was still Drakthar, still the child he'd saved, but also something more. "It worked," Dr. Okonkwo said, awe in her voice as she read the data. "You're stable, all of you." The transformation created a new form of existence, physical beings with quantum consciousness. You can maintain the network without burning out. The queen approached her granddaughter, tears streaming down her ancient face. "You're alive, truly alive." "We all are," Saris replied, looking around at the transformed volunteers. Different, but alive. In the days that followed, they discovered the full extent of their transformation. The nodes could shift between physical and quantum states at will, maintaining the synthesis network while living normal lives. They aged slower, healed faster, and could feel the emotional resonance of anyone connected to the network. But most importantly, they were the living proof that humans and Drakthar could become something greater together. The peace talks that had stalled for months suddenly progressed. With nodes on both sides, able to share true understanding, compromises that had seemed impossible became achievable. Colony worlds that had been battlegrounds became sites of cooperative rebuilding. The war that had consumed generations ended not with victory or defeat, but with evolution. Ethan stood on the observation deck of the spire, now renamed the Unity Station. Saris stood beside him, no longer the dying child he'd rescued, but not quite the adult she appeared to be either. The transformation had aged her in some ways, kept her young in others. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "What you've become?" He thought about it, feeling the constant hum of the network in his consciousness. The awareness of millions of other beings just a thought away. He was no longer fully human, would never be just a simple soldier again. "No," he said finally. "I lost one family to war. I gained another through peace. Fair trade. Even though I'm not human, you're my daughter. Everything else is just details." She leaned against him. This alien child who'd become his family, his purpose, his bridge to a better future. Through the network, he could feel her emotions, love, gratitude, and a deep sense of belonging. "Father," she said quietly, "there's something you should know. The transformation, when you shared your life force with me during Varn's attack, some of your genetic material integrated with mine at the quantum level." He looked at her, not understanding. "I'm not just Drakthar anymore," she explained. "I'm partially human now. Your genetic patterns are woven into my quantum signature, in every way that matters, biological and otherwise. You really are my father." The revelation should have been shocking, but somehow it felt right. They'd been family by choice, then by sacrifice, and now by the very fabric of their being. "Does this mean I'm part Drakthar?" he asked. "A little. We're all becoming something new, human and Drakthar, and whatever comes next." She smiled, that expression he'd first seen in a ruined military base a lifetime ago. "The war wanted us to be enemies. Instead, we became family, and through us, maybe both species can become family too." Through the observation deck's windows, they watched ships departing Unity Station, human and Drakthar vessels flying in formation. Their crews connected through the synthesis network, understanding each other in ways that had been impossible just years before. The war was over, the peace had begun, and at the heart of it all was a simple truth. A quiet soldier had saved an enemy child, and she had saved everyone in return. "So what now?" Saris asked. "The galaxy doesn't need soldiers anymore. What does Ethan Cole do in peacetime?" He thought about it, feeling the network's gentle pulse, the millions of connections that needed tending, the bridges between species that required maintenance. "I think I'll keep doing what I've been doing," he said. "Taking care of my daughter, helping her take care of everyone else. That's a big job." "Good thing we're family. Big jobs are easier when you don't face them alone." They stood together, father and daughter, human and Drakthar, watching the stars and feeling the pulse of a galaxy, learning to heal. The transformation had cost them everything they were, and given them everything they could be. In the end, that too was a fair trade. Through the network came a familiar presence, Dr. Lyra Miles, the woman who'd helped save Saris in those first desperate days. She'd survived the bounty hunter attack, recovered, and joined the synthesis network as one of the first voluntary converts. "Ethan," her voice echoed in his mind, warm with affection. "Saris, the medical data from the transformation is incredible. We're not just creating peace. We're creating a new form of life. Evolution in real time." "Evolution was always Varn's goal," Ethan pointed out. "But he forced it." Saris replied, "We're choosing it. That makes all the difference." As the days turned to weeks, then months, the transformed nodes became ambassadors, bridges, and healers. They helped refugees reconnect with families across enemy lines. They mediated disputes with perfect understanding of both sides. They showed, by their very existence, that the division between human and Drakthar was not insurmountable. Some refused the synthesis, and that was acceptable. Choice was sacred. But enough embraced it that the network grew stronger, more stable, more capable of maintaining peace. And at the center of it all, a father and daughter who'd chosen each other when the universe gave them every reason not to. The quietest soldier had found his voice. It spoke not in words, but in actions, in sacrifice, in love that transcended species and war and death itself. And Saris, the tiny vampire he'd rescued from ruins, had become the bridge between worlds, calling him family and meaning it with every atom of her transformed being. The war was over. The future had begun. And somewhere in the quantum space between thought and reality, the consciousness of a little girl named Lily smiled, knowing her father had found a reason to live again, had found another daughter to love, had found peace in the most unlikely place. Family, after all, was what you made it. And they had made something beautiful,